Welcome to Pixel Composer 1.18.10. So we are one step closer to the next stable update. So let's see what's new in this version. The first, we have a number of new nodes. The first one is the dot pattern. And this one is really simple, right? You just use it to generate a dot patterns. You can have a rectangular or hexagonal grids. You can control the size, the spacing, the transformation, and all the kind of stuff. So one feature that made me make this a separate node is the ability for the dot to overlap itself. So you can go to intensity and then reduce the intensity a little bit to allow the color to add together. And then you can adjust the dot size. And when you set the dot size to be higher than 1, you're gonna see that the dot patterns start to overlap each other. And obviously the use of this feature is to be used with the mappable parameter so that you can create a halftone effect like this, for example, which can be a little bit tricky to implement that using other nodes, especially like the overlap part. Next is a gap contract node. So this node is used to, well, contract the gap in your image, right? It works best with a black and white image. As you can see here, we're gonna have a bunch of surface, we're gonna have a bunch of crack here, and the gap contract, we just do that. We just contract the gaps into 1 pixel wide. And it can be useful because sometimes with random tile or like some other random node, you're gonna have some weird inconsistent gap size. You're gonna try to like reduce it, but then some gap just disappear and stuff like that. So the gap contract will try to fix that. Now it's not perfect. Definitely there's gonna be some artifact here and there, but it can help you to create a cleaner image before you process it any further. Next we have Triangulate point node. This one will take in a point or the array of points, like the output from the scatter point node, and then it's gonna, well, triangulate it into a set of segments that you can be used in other nodes like draw line. You set the data type into a segment. Now you can draw, you can of course animate the point, whatever, to create some triangulate effect. And that would be the 3 new nodes in this version. Then we have an improvement on the already existed node. First, we have an improvement on the sprite file node. Very small improvement, just the addition of the frame amount output, so that you can output the amount of frames in your sprite file. The same thing with tag as well. Why it is so small? What the hell? If you select the tag, if we're gonna have new output here, frame range, we're just gonna give you the range of the frame that tag cover. And next we have a mass input for many of the generator node, like for example the zigzag node. We now have the mass input that you can just connect other surface into, and it's just gonna mass out the area. You can use like blend node multiply for that, but now it's in one node. The simplex noise also got some new properties in the advanced setting, just for you to control like how the scaling of the noise change in per iteration to create more interesting noise image. The checker generator now have a built-in diagonal mode. So by default, you want to create a diagonal pattern like this, you have to set like the amount to become like a square root of 2 stuff, right? And you have to set the angle to like 45 degrees, which can lead to some weird artifacts in some edge case. So now you can just go to diagonal mode. The grid related node like grid, triangular grid, hexagonal grid, those also get the texture interpolation and oversample setting. A warp node now have new properties for back surface, which allow you to give it different surface on the front and in the back. The composite node now have new setting for content-based selection. So normally the selection will be based on the bounding box, right? Like in this case, the grapes image here is on top. So if you try to select other image here, it will always select grapes. But if you set to a content-based selection, now it will select based on the pixel under your mouse. So now you can select object under the transparent pixel. But notice that it can be a little bit slower because it's gonna have some extra processing overhead. The round corner also got a new improved algorithm. Should make it looks a lot nicer now compared to before, especially when work with like different surface or like some non-rectangular patterns. The scatter node also got an improvement when using the direct data distribution type. So what it means when you choose the direct data is that it's gonna use the array of vector 2 or array of point to determine where to scatter the image, right? So when you use with other node like the scatter point node, you connect to it, you're gonna see that it's gonna scatter image based on the point, right? Now then, improvement on the extra value property here. When using the direct data, you can provide extra information to tell the node how to modify, how to transform each of the copies, and you can do that by providing extra information into each of the point. Like for example, I have the scatter point here, right? It's output array of points like this. I have it output 9 point, so I'm gonna have another array that go from 0 to 9, so it's 0 to 8, so 9 values, and then I'm gonna put it in array zip, and I'm gonna tell them to spread the content. Now it's gonna convert each of the point, it's gonna insert each of the value in this array range into each of these points. As you can see, each of the point now have extra values, and now if I use this value with the scatter, nothing will change for now because we haven't told the node what to do with that extra information yet. But here in the extra values, you can click on it and you can say use the extra value to control scale. Now you're gonna use the 0 to 8 to control the scale, right? From 0, which is nothing, to 8, which is like really big. So maybe you put it into a matte node. So now you can see a little bit clearer, right? And now we're gonna have this palette, which is just an array of colors. If you plug the palette into the array zip, it's gonna combine the color information. It's gonna add color information to each of the points as well. And then you can go to the scatter node. You go to extra value and then add the color properties. It's now gonna apply the color blending into each of the copies. Let's just draw some circle. Now you can see how each of the color being applied to each of the copies. Then in the particle and the VFX spawner node, I have rearranged the property a little bit. And you can see here, I move all the optional properties like following the path, the physics, the ground, the physics ground, and the wiggle to the end of the inspector with the toggle selection so that it can be easier to find the property that you want. And there's also a slight improvement on the VFX override node to make it easier to use. Now each of the property can now be toggled on and off. You can now set it to use the absolute or relative transformation, so you want to adjust the value directly, or you may just want to add or subtract it from the current values. Next is an update to the number node. In the rotator display, you now have the rotator range that you can adjust, or the knob range, so that you can change the range of your rotator. There's also an improvement on the scaling, and all the clamping properties should now work properly now. The array sample node now have option to select the dimension of the value you want to select. It's quite difficult to explain, but in this case, I prepare you the two-dimensional array, right? It's an array of 0 to 9. This is one object, another object, another object, right? Now, normally when you use array sampling, it's gonna try to go to the deepest layer of the array and then do sampling at that layers. Like for example, in the past, I have to set it to 1. You connect it to this node. You're gonna see that it's gonna go inside each of this sub-array and then sampling the content inside, right? So now from 0 to 9, it just sample down to 0, 2, 4, 6, 8 because I set the step to 2. And that's how it used to work. But in this new version, you can now select the dimension you want to apply it from. So if you set the dimension to zeros, it just instead gonna apply sampling on the first dimension it's found, which in this case would be, you know, this is the first object, this is the second object, and the third object. So when it's sampling on that level, it's just gonna skip the second one because the step is 2 again. So it's just gonna get the entire first array 0 to 9 and the third array, which is just this one. You now have an option to control the amount of sampling so that you can sample as much as you want, even when you're not using the random mode. Now what it means, right? The usage for this is quite specific really, but it will allow you to do something like this. So I just scatter 5 points around this circle area, right? And then I'm gonna do sampling with dimension 0 on a step of 2. And now I'm just gonna plug it to draw line with segment information, right? And then I increase the custom amount. You're gonna see that I now drawing a star, right? And as I increase the number of points I scatter, you're gonna see that the point of the star increase. Now on the topic of the point and the array, there's also an improvement on the move point node as well. First is that the node got renamed into a transform point, and it's now have a lot more options. As you can see here, you can connect point to it, and now you can apply transformation. You can control the position, you can rotate it around, you can change the anchor point of rotation, and you can also scale the point. Next will be about the user interface. One thing you may or may not notice throughout this entire video is that the visual identity of some icon got changed. I wouldn't say improved. I think some change actually make it look a little bit difficult to distinguish, but the goal is to make the icon look more unified. So you can see that the thickness of the line are now uniform across all icons. And some icons got new looks, like the animation tool over here got complete new looks. Some of them just got some adjustment just to bring all the icons together to be in one pack before doing further adjustment. Not only that, you may notice this compared to the previous video or the older video, is that the icon look a little bit crisper because I now have a new default theme in the preference section. You're gonna see the default theme, just called the default HQ, which is the same as default, except all the icon will now export at 2x scale. So it should be crisper when you use higher DPI, higher UI scale setting. Next will be the improvement on the graph panel. There's new option for node replacement. And you right click on a node. You can now replace a node with a new one. And when you will replace the node, it's gonna try to match the input and output of the values to make sure that the connections stay the same. Now it doesn't work all the time because sometimes the node that you try to replace. It just have different input output. Next, you may already notice that there's number preview for a non-surface data as well. Like with numbers, you're gonna see just big number in the preview panels, or with colors, with palette, the gradient. Right, those are not surface. It doesn't have surface output, but the data can now be viewed through the preview panel. For vector 2, I think the output is just a vector 2 point. Like the scatter point here, and the output as an array of vector 2. It will also output the vector 2 as a point in the surface as well. Oh, and the boolean type as well. It should just show true false. Yep. Next, in the preference dialog, you're gonna see a new section called cleanups, and it will allow you to clean up the default file or the file that is generated by the software, and it can be useful sometimes when like your default collection maybe act up, or you try or accidentally delete the default collection or default theme. You can just go and clear everything, and the next time you start up the software, you're gonna replace the file with a proper one, with a new one. You can also clear cache, clear autosave, and the temp folder and stuff like that, which can become really big if you leave the software open or you use the software for a long time, especially with autosave. Because it doesn't do like auto delete, it can become really big in your system. Next is for a palette and gradient editor. I just add the search bar. So when you have more and more preset, you can now just search using the name to get the palette that you want. The same thing with the gradient as well. You can search for the palette here, and you can search for the gradient preset if you have any. And there's one feature that I skipped in the notes section, which is a introduction of the pixel builder. The pixel builder is not a new feature per se, but in this version I have reworked the entire system to make it more functional. But I'm not gonna talk about it because there are quite a lot in here that it's probably gonna need its own video, and I might just talk about it in the next table as a feature of the next table instead of this beta, because it's still under development too. So we're just gonna skip about it by now. And as usual, we have a series of bug fixes I'm gonna show on the screen right now. That should be it for this update. Like I said in the previous update, because we are really close for the next table now, I'm gonna try not to add any breaking features, especially with like the save file and stuff like that. The next version might be the last one before the 1.19. So you can try the beta version now, and if you have bug or you have feature requests, you can come in the Discord channels as usual. And that will be all for today's video. Thank you everyone for watching, and special thanks for every single Patreon supporter on the screen, and see you in the next one.